Really excited to be here talking about web content management. It's kind of a thing I've spent a lot of time with over the years, and there's a lot of things going on there. And so the goal today is really to talk about some of the different trends, business and as well as technology trends inside and outside of healthcare that are influencing the selection of web content management systems today. And to talk about how that fits with your teams and your needs as a healthcare organization to help set the groundwork if this is something that you're kind of evaluating where you're at in terms of web content management and the technology that supports that. So we'll try to keep it not too terribly deep into the technology today. Hopefully if I get too far in the weeds, somebody will pull me out in the questions, but want to kind of cover a broad swath of things that I'm seeing out there in the market and just hopefully give you some ideas and some inspiration as you move forward. To structure the conversation today, I'm going to be leaning on this people, process, and technology framework. And so this is a pretty old framework that relates to just kind of overall organizational change and particularly around technology in the organization, and really starts from a foundation of strategy. So understanding what you're trying to achieve as a business and what the strategy is for getting there, and then making sure that we're covering all of those various areas, typically starting with people and then processes and then the technology that should serve all of those purposes coming in there at the end. So we'll go through in that kind of order today. We'll kind of touch briefly on the strategy, people, and process, and spend a little bit of a deeper dive into the technology section as we go through that framework. Something I do want to call out, though, as you're thinking about this framework, some people add in another bubble here of partners, and really thinking about what partners you have at the table with you and how they complement the capabilities that you have in-house. I think for healthcare organizations, that's just a huge part of your overall strategy when it comes to marketing and technology. And so definitely want to have that top of mind, although we're not going to go super deep into that today. Just to call it a little bit of structure as well, as we go through, we'll have some slides that look like this that are talking about some of the trends that we're seeing out there and how that's influencing the different approaches to web content management. And then some tips as well for if you are kind of evaluating where you're at or you're working on understanding what you may need for your team to support you from a technology point of view. And finally, by way of introduction, you should hopefully know this by now, but I work for Geonetric, and I call that out for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have my unique perspective on it and my biases that I'm bringing to the table. At Geonetric, we work with clients on our own healthcare-specific CMS system called VitalSite, and we also do projects and work on several off-the-shelf platforms, including Sitecore, Drupal, and WordPress. And so we're always a little bit more biased towards those things that we're familiar with and what we're close to. And so I just want to call that out. And also as a reminder, the information that you're getting in this webinar today, I hope is not too biased. I'm trying to present a broad view. But as you're reading articles and looking at information out there across the web, I'm reading articles all the time. And it's like, wait, who wrote this? And oh, yep, they are a shop that entirely works on this particular platform. And of course, the article is a little bit skewed towards that viewpoint. So something to keep in mind is what is that source of information as you're out there researching different options. So let's dig in, starting here with strategy. And the big trend here, probably not a huge surprise to the folks on this call, is the digital front door approach. This has just been a huge thing inside of healthcare, a real shift in focus towards that digital transformation and making sure that patients can easily access the kinds of transactions that they need to in order to actually do business with you online. So this is something that has gone around in different industries and is kind of taking the shape within healthcare as being referred to as the digital front door. So it's not just about your website, it goes much, much deeper than that. It really goes into the whole operations of the organization, the way that you think about data as a company across the entire enterprise. And particularly within healthcare, there's a few specific goals that we kind of focus on here. One of those, and probably the central thing, is really improving access to care and doing that by reducing the friction. So we want to be able to allow our patients to create appointments and book actual meetings with their physicians online to accomplish those tasks just like they would if they were picking up the phone or walking in the front door of a building. We want to allow them to do that in a self-service way and provide them the information and all of the support that they need along that journey in order to make those decisions and move their care along on their own. And thinking about that journey, looking at how we engage them in a unique way according to their particular journey. So thinking about personalization and some of those different technologies that can apply to helping to guide someone through that overall end-to-end consistent journey. And then I think a piece that maybe sometimes is overlooked is about how we use data across the organization. So rather than looking at silos of data from different parts of the organization, trying to find a more cohesive view that really guides decision-making throughout the healthcare enterprise. So this is kind of the trend. It's having some influences on what people are doing out there and how they're using content management. And the first thing that I think is really useful is to look at this information from Kaufman Hall. This is from a 2019 healthcare consumerism survey. I think you would see only probably increases in the priorities of some of these things. A lot of healthcare organizations prioritizing things like using digital tools to engage consumers, providing price transparency and allowing some of those consumer behaviors, shopping behaviors to really be realized in the digital ecosystem. So these are really critical things, and what you're seeing on this chart is while they're high priority with a large number of organizations prioritizing these efforts, they're not feeling like they've got great capabilities in those areas. So this is an area of development for us in healthcare, is to be able to really offer these kinds of transactional self-service capabilities to consumers. So not a huge news flash here. I think what is interesting though is thinking about that digital experience and in parallel to the digital transformation of the organization. So there's really two things going on. There's an experience that we want to create for our health consumers. We want to be able to do that across multiple different channels. So that's kind of represented along the top here. And along the bottom, you've got the organization and the digital transformation within the enterprise, going really digital first and making sure that everything operationally is supported that way, having a data strategy that helps to guide the analytics and produce insights and aid in decision making. And all of that being guided by an overall strategy. In the past, those things for healthcare have been kind of separated. We create a website experience and it didn't always in the past tie into operations or provide insights to the rest of the organization. And I think the shift that we're seeing here is really about connecting those things together and the task of a whole range of content management systems in order to tie those pieces together. So in this world, content now includes a lot of different things, particularly real-time data that can be used to support those transactional processes and ways of orchestrating that information into a cohesive patient personal journey. So being able to make sure that we are talking to the same person like they're not a stranger every time they come back to us, and helping to guide them along the way towards the next reasonable step in the process. On the flip side of that, from the organization point of view, like I said, it's really about connecting the data together rather than having all of this information we can gather through the website live in its own silo, while the information about the patient care lives in its own silo, and information about trends in your region or usage of the system across the board lives somewhere else. How do we pull all of that information together and use it in a really valuable way to not only guide the information on the website, but to help make decisions inside of the organization? So this is kind of how that trend connects into the task that we're asking these systems to do and things that we're thinking about as we really move forward and look down the road into the space of content management. As you're looking at that and thinking about that as an organization, the key here from my point of view is to really understand your business strategy. And I talk with a lot of healthcare organizations, a lot of folks, and the more clear that they are about what their organization is trying to achieve, what that vision is, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, how they plan to get there, not just from a marketing team perspective, not just from a digital perspective, but as an organization, what are all the steps along the way that need to move together in order to get to that future state? the better conversation we can have about what the right technical solutions and user experience approaches are to solving those challenges along the way. Some things to keep in mind: are there new or changing business models? Are you trying new things as an organization that really change up some of the metrics that you're going to want to track and how you get value? A lot of folks in our space are seeing mergers and acquisitions. That can really change how you're approaching things online and what you need to achieve, and even the geography that you're reaching out to. Thinking, like I said, about data strategy. How are all of these data points and data silos going to come together to help create a greater whole? And then, of course, what we focus on more often is the marketing strategy and brand strategy. But these are key pieces that can really inform the overall design of a solution, and understanding what's in play and what may not be recommended for creating a great website and a great digital experience. So that's kind of from the strategy vantage point. If we shift over and think about people, like I said, this is really the place that model encourages you to start, because you've got really great people resources, I hope, at your organization, and you want to take full advantage of them. And I think one of the ways that we're seeing this play out within the content management space is really an increased focus on the authoring experience, and not necessarily to the detriment of the end user, the front end experience that we're creating on the website itself, but acknowledging that it takes a lot of work to make that happen, and that you need a lot of people involved with a lot of different skill sets. And so some of the different approaches that we've been taking in the last several years, things like content marketing, or moving to more of a digital first approach to content creation, using personalization, all of these things require a lot of content to support those strategies. And that in turn puts pressure internally on the teams to create and sustain that production of content. And there's some great stats from the Content Marketing Institute. Just last year in a survey that they did, they saw that nearly a third, 27% of content marketing teams actually increased in size. This is in the B2C space. And about 60% stayed the same size. So continuing to see that acceleration forward, where we're adding people to the team to create more and more content. What this does is really put a focus on efficient content authoring, the ability to create content creation workflows, to actually even handle some of the project management aspects of content creation, and looking at using structured content and being able to facilitate the distribution of that content through some of the tools. And a lot of this really depends on where you're at as an organization and as a team. How big is your team? How sophisticated and are your team members in using different technologies? How distributed are you? Are you spread out? Or are you all kind of in one location, one office? All of those things can really impact what is the right set of tools here. But there's everything from smaller standalone kind of services to things like Sitecore's Content Hub that can help to really fuel that content creation process and bring everybody into that, and help to unify the way that content gets created and distributed, not just necessarily for the web or for a digital experience, but even into some of the traditional media as well. So when I'm thinking about this, I really start with looking at an organization's team structure, and trying not to get the cart before the horse here, and really looking at where is a particular organization at in terms of their team. And what we see, and the folks that I know are on the call today, we see the full range. Some of you are that Marcom team of one. You're the person that does kind of everything in terms of the organization, and that's a particular set of needs there. And then we see a whole range going from there. And what's illustrated here, the shaded folks are the folks that are really involved day to day with the website, with the digital experience as you move through this chain. So we've got that marketing team and somebody maybe that's designated web manager, the marketing team, but within that larger marketing organization, there's actual team focused on the digital experience. And then we've got organizations that are taking more of a digital first approach to their overall marketing and really having people involved throughout that department. And that puts some different pressures on what you're looking for inside of a content management system. Some things that we see is that shift from making publishing really easy, particularly for that team of one or that smaller team, all the way up to having more support for the full life cycle of content. How do we track the ideas around content? How do we do a kind of a pitch meeting and then farm out all of the pieces that need to be created? The shift from being more web focused to thinking about more of that multi-channel digital experience. Where are you on that spectrum as well? And then thinking about the rate of change for your overall digital experience. Is this something that is slowly changing over time, or you've got the resources and the staff to be able to constantly be making iterations on your platform and running experiments and trying out new approaches, being able to do that rapid analysis. So these are things that you would want to understand about yourself as an organization. And I would really encourage you to focus on maxing out the capabilities of your current system. This is that cart before the horse part, where you don't want the system. It's kind of sometimes I think a little bit of a waste of an effort to have a system that's just too big for where you're at as an organization. And so really leaning towards matching the system to where you are, rather than being aspirational. If we buy a system that has all of these things in it, then we'll develop the team to run it. Can sometimes get organizations in a little bit of trouble. And so I think really being careful about where that match is at and making sure that you've got a couple of steps down the road to support the next things you want to do, but you're really focused on maximizing a lot of the strategy, a lot of the pure marketing pieces of what you're working on. So I wanted to take a little tangent here and a brief aside and talk about an anti-pattern that I see as well. And not to pick on anybody if they are this person in the organization, but a lot of times we're talking to an organization and the solution has been to hire a developer, just one developer to help out with the digital platform and all of that. And it's something to watch out for. And I think what we've found over time is that if you've got a cluster of folks that can handle that deep area of expertise, it really creates a better product where they can bounce ideas around and really understand and sustain what's being built and make sure that it is being able to be supported for the long haul and to avoid having any sort of bottlenecks in the process. And that's, I'm talking about developers here, but anytime you've got that deep level of specialization, you've got a risk of creating a bottleneck. And so that's something to really think about in terms of what is your team set to take on, what are the right sets of skills to be developing. And so that's kind of that tip I'd like to bring us back to here. And thinking about within your team, what is that core competency? What is the breadth of skills you need on the team versus those deeper areas, the few areas that you really need to go deep into as a team. So you may have folks that have some design background, that know a little bit of coding, that can write content, that have some content strategy background. Which of those things do you want to double down on and make sure that you've got people that can take this all the way through at a very advanced level? And in what areas can a partner maybe fill in some of those more broad and shallow areas with deep expertise that is needed, maybe on a less frequent basis? So this is really, I think, a key piece of establishing that identity as a team and really understanding this is what we want to be good at. My biased perspective on that is, I love working with healthcare marketing teams that are really, really deep experts in what their organization does and does well, how they're positioned in the market, and what their strategy is for moving forward. And I love our ability to bring all of those other pieces, the deep technical expertise and the user experience expertise as needed to help accomplish all of those things that they particularly understand. So this is kind of a know yourself exercise here. So thinking about process, and we love to think about process. One of the big trends that I've seen, and this is going back even a few years, is we're actually talking about governance as an industry, and there's been a lot more focus on digital governance, recognizing that need. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, this is really about figuring out what is the accountability, what are the roles, and who has decision-making authority about what when it comes to the digital experiences that we're creating. I really think about it as a way of operationalizing your strategy within a website, and particularly when you've got a lot of stakeholders in a large enterprise that have different ideas about what you should be doing. And I think everybody can really identify with that. So we want to make sure that we've got a sustainable process in place to support that overall strategy. So if you're wondering if you might need digital governance, here's a few signs that might be the case. And I see these things happen all the time. Who gets to make this decision? Who can say yes or no to something that we want to go and try? If you don't know who that is, then that's a sign that this is maybe a process that needs to be worked through. If you've got competing interests that create differences in what content gets added to the site, in what gets resourced as far as projects, if that's driving where you're putting emphasis, and versus your overall strategy, that may be something that needs to be looked at. If not everybody internally is bought in on the web strategy or the way that things are proceeding, if there's not alignment there, I think you all recognize what that feels like and what happens there. It's not great, and it really causes a lot of churn and a lot of friction in getting things done. And then if you don't have the documentation or standards, some of those processes, if they don't exist, they're difficult to use, that can really create a lot of inconsistency across that digital experience. And this may be something that you would feel, particularly if there's turnover on the team, or if you're bringing new folks on and trying to get them up to speed and having a struggle with that. Not having that in place as you have that kind of situation makes it a real challenge. And then just overall, if you're challenged to keep content up to date, you're finding things that aren't working, maybe worth taking a look at creating an updated governance framework. So this could be, and I think has been, its own webinar in and of itself, so I won't go real deep here, but just to give you a sense, when we think about a governance framework, these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. And you can see a little bit of overlap with the model we're working through here, where people and process are a big part of that, as well as documentation and training. But also deciding within that, what are those decision-making processes, and what tools are we going to use? What is budget? How are some of those things decided? So as you cover all of those different areas, it can really streamline the way that decisions are made and how things work. And this is one of those things I think is a great trend in that it's being focused on at a really important foundation as you're evaluating different platforms out there and different steps to take with the digital experience that you're creating. Having this in place or starting with looking at digital governance can help to kind of ward off some of the challenges that you may be tempted to solve through technology, when really it's an internal conversation. We need to actually figure out how we're going to make these kinds of decisions, or who gets a say in deciding what goes on the website, how it's presented, and the differences that are there. I see quite often folks come in and they're challenged with, this group wants information presented this way and that group wants it a different way. Do we want to support that through the website, or are there reasons that we want to create a more cohesive and unified user experience that we can substantiate through a governance plan? So evaluating your governance, really looking at what do you have in place today, where do you see some growth opportunities? These are the kinds of questions to be asking yourself about what could make your life easier in terms of making some of those process types of decisions. All right, let me get my slide to move forward here. All right, so jumping into the part everybody loves to talk about is the technology. I've got a few different trends we're looking at here, and some different thoughts about what's going on in the technology space when it comes to managing content and managing digital experiences. The first of these is really recognizing that there's just this slow, constant evolution of the platforms that are out there. So if you selected a CMS a few years ago and you're coming back into the market and looking again, you may not see a lot of different names out there, a lot of different brands, but there has been a constant change going on under the covers with a lot of systems and some shifts overall that may not be quite as obvious. And so some of that is moving more towards structured content. So a lot of systems in the past several years have kind of made a leap from older page-based models towards being able to really structure content. So Drupal is one of those that is top of mind for me that way. If you were familiar with Drupal 7 years ago and you're looking at Drupal 8 or 9, you're going to see something quite a bit different in the way that it structures the content that you're working with, the way things are handled, and the capabilities that it has because of that. There's a lot of shift in the industry as well towards sort of managed delivery models. So things like hosted solutions or software as a service. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it's kind of a shift in expectations. I think a lot of organizations just really don't want to be in the job of hosting their own site or managing those things on their own, and it makes a lot more sense to have a tailored solution that manages the delivery of the software. And then a lot of expansion in experience management, a lot of added capabilities there. So I wanted to call out a few different sets of terminology that we think about here and just kind of walk through that if you're kind of dipping your toe in the water here and not sure what this alphabet soup really means. The classic way we've talked about this is as a CMS, content management system, or a WCMS, web content management system. There's a few new terms being thrown around there: digital experience platform, and then agile CMS is a little bit newer term. So digital experience platform tends to incorporate more different elements that provide cross-channel experiences and more personalization types of things built into the ecosystem of the platform. The agile CMS is interesting. This has become kind of a group of things that centers around headless technology, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, but different ways of structuring the architecture of the site in order to deliver iterations more frequently. And so I think a little bit of it is marketing or branding going on there, but definitely a different thought process that we'll dig into here in a bit. As I mentioned, some of the delivery models have shifted. So it used to be installed software. You got some server space and you installed the software on there and all the underlying dependencies, and you ran your website off of that. Definitely moving towards more hosted models, and particularly software as a service, where it's just more of a subscription-based arrangement and everything is kind of taken care of for you on that hosting and software management side. And then software licenses is always a question that comes up. And we definitely see a huge range of both open source and proprietary systems. So open source meaning you've got access to that source code, and proprietary usually meaning that that's locked down and you really can't necessarily see under the covers. There's a variety of reasons folks may go one direction or another. There's sometimes organizational preferences for the open source sort of ethos around sharing and free software. Sometimes this is really about what do you have access to in terms of being able to make changes to the system, and I'll walk through a little bit of the structure that allows you to do that in either direction. So really the theme here is a lot of the names may be the same. So a lot of the brands have stayed the same, but the way things are being delivered has continued to evolve. So if you want a high-level overview of what goes into a CMS, this is a diagram designed to kind of help set the stage for that. And within a content management system, usually we're looking at a few pieces that we think about. One of those, and the central part, is really the core software. What is it that you're kind of buying or installing that is going to run the overall system? And then there's a few other pieces that surround that and help to tailor that to your unique needs. One of those you see there is third-party plugins. So these are pieces maybe not made by the CMS provider, but by other third parties, and help to provide some additional functionality. And then over on the right-hand column there, you can see custom functionality or plugins. So some code maybe that was written for your unique website or your particular needs, or either as kind of pure code or as a plugin, depending on how the system is put together. And then there's usually a piece that is visual design, themes or templates, those kinds of things. And I've got little editing icons there because typically, in order to maintain your upgrade path, the place that you're really looking to make those customizations is in the custom functionality or plugin structure and within the visual design. Those are usually kind of open areas within a CMS that have been created to allow that flexibility and that customization. So if somebody's talking about modifying that source code, that core software, that's one of the red flags that you're going to be on a broken upgrade path at some point. So those are kind of some of the boxes that go into what's inside of a CMS. All of that typically sits on some sort of a web server or some sort of a database. And depending on the platform, you may or may not have a lot of visibility into some of those layers or need to have a lot of visibility into some of those layers. A few of the other pieces that then fit alongside of that raise some questions, and I think are where, if you're trying to compare different systems, these are places that it's really helpful to understand what the differences are across those systems and how it may fit with your particular needs as an organization. So one of those is the content structures and overall system configuration. And that can be handled in a number of different ways, and different systems do this differently, and there's certainly trade-offs to all of those approaches. And this is really about how do you decide what makes up a piece of content, what fields and information describe that piece of content in a repeatable way, so that if you've got a collection of blog posts or a collection of physician profiles, that they maintain a consistent structure. And a variety of ways that this can be handled. Sometimes this is built into the core software itself. This could be something that's provided by a plugin. It could be custom code that is written for your site that is unique to you. Or sometimes it's configuration that is in the database and is kind of a point and click system for building that out. So these are kind of questions to think about as you're looking at systems and trying to decide how they fit your needs. Depending on your capabilities within your team, again, knowing kind of your identity there, things like making plugins or custom code may be easier or harder for you as a team. Making changes to things that are configurations within the core software or within a database might be more accessible to more of your team members. So just thinking about how frequently some of those adjustments need to be made and who can make them is a good piece of the process there. Digital assets is another thing to consider. There's a lot of different approaches here. And again, this is just meant to be kind of a high level view of the pieces. There's some systems that store this on the web server itself in the file system. Some will actually connect with a content distribution network, content delivery network, and help to serve the files that way, which can help speed up the site and scale things nicely. Some store them in the database, which has different pros and cons to it, or it may rely on an external system to store and manage and organize all of those digital assets. So something to think about as well as you think about all those images and PDFs and other files that help to make up your website. How will those be organized, managed, and maintained? And then the things that we think of as content itself. So the actual pages, those provider profiles, location profiles, information about your services. How will that text content, video content, other things like that be maintained in the system? And that can be in a variety of approaches as well. Usually these days, that's content that is stored in a database, although we'll talk about some approaches that pull that from other systems via APIs and really understanding not only what can the system support, but if you're bringing content in from other internal systems, in healthcare commonly that's physician records that may be coming from like a credentialing system or a staff database. If you're bringing that data in from another system, what does that flow look like and how will that be supported in various systems is a good thing to dig into. So again, just a really high level kind of view to give you some things to think about inside of that structure and maybe where to poke around for some of those differences. Wouldn't be a talk about the DXP space if we didn't bring up some analyst charts here. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about these. These are always interesting, and I'm sure you all get the emails from all of the vendors as well when these come out, and they're happy about where they are in the particular quadrant or wave that they've fallen into. A lot of organizations really look at these to drive their decision making. And there's just a few things to know about that. Like I said, it's very useful information, and particularly the reports can be even more useful to understand some of the differences among these different solutions. But it's important to know as well that the categories that these fall into are somewhat made up. So digital experience platform really didn't exist a few years ago, and all of a sudden it's this whole category that's been created. And what happens as a result of that is you see some of these companies starting to acquire other companies to create that complete solution. And that's an area to really dig into. If you're looking at really using those different parts of a solution that is a really comprehensive solution, rather than assembling your own sort of best of breed solution, really looking at how integrated are those systems. If they've acquired some of these over time, they may or may not be as integrated as you might imagine. And so that's something to really kind of dig into with the systems. There's sort of a pressure that these quadrants put onto some of the companies to compete in that space. Something else to keep in mind is leader, as it is on this chart, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best fit for you. It's really important to understand what the system is good at, and we can talk a little bit about the biases of different systems. I always like to say that software is biased. There's some purpose that it was created for, that it's just better at than other things, and really understanding what that is for a particular system. So you may have a system that is really designed around e-commerce, and it's really great for that, and it's a leading system there. For healthcare, that may not be a really great fit. It just may not support the kinds of content structures and functions that you need for your site. So definitely these are useful, can be helpful to see where things are at and what's out there, but definitely give it a little bit of thought of how to interpret what's on these charts. So thinking about what really at a platform level makes a strong fit for healthcare, I've got 4 different areas to look at. The first of these, with it being healthcare, and certainly you know, the cybersecurity situations in the last year have continued to push on this first item, thinking about security and reliability. Any kind of a breach for a healthcare organization can be really challenging, you know, whether or not it's, you know, technically HIPAA related information that is part of that breach. Just from a brand perspective, it's something that we never want out there. And so it's really kind of one of those fundamental things to look at, both from a pure security perspective as well as a reliability in terms of uptime, and will the system support the kinds of traffic and the kinds of needs that we have. Thinking about that, most platforms really can meet these needs. This is one of those it depends sorts of answers. You know, WordPress is a platform that gets picked on a lot for security. It's so widely used out there. There's such a range of sites built on it and a range of developers building sites that sometimes the security really isn't paid attention to. It can be put together as a very secure platform and a very reliable and scalable platform. It's not necessarily the same approach that is taken, you know, if you're buying one of those, you know, $5 a month web host plans and putting your site up on that. And so really understanding both the system itself and the technical approach to hosting and maintaining and implementing that is important when it comes to understanding how secure and reliable the resulting end product will be. For healthcare, we've got lean teams, right? So we don't have a lot of extra time to be monkeying around with different systems. So simple and efficient content authoring can be really important, especially if you're distributing any of that authorship outside of kind of that core web or marketing team. You really need something that's easy to use, that isn't going to drag a lot of your time into supporting users of this system. And so that's always something to keep in mind and to really look at, you know, in demos of the different systems. How is it that people can get in and edit the content that they need to? How complex really are the workflows, and how complex do we really need them to be? You know, what I found is usually a couple step workflow is plenty for most organizations. And then the third item here, as we think about healthcare content in particular, there's some particular structure needs that are really, really common. Things like physician profiles, again. Having the structure in place for that is really important. And so knowing that those content types can be supported in the system, as well as being able to reuse that content effectively and to ensure the findability of that content, both for the navigation and search experience on your site, as well as from a search engine optimization perspective. And so that's really something to make sure, again, while most of the platforms in and of themselves can do this, a lot of it comes down to the implementation, making sure that all of that is supported all the way through the build out of those content types. And then the fourth one that I have here is low maintenance. Again, because we've got these lean teams, we don't have a lot of time to spend just kind of moving sideways with our web platforms. So if it's a platform that requires a lot of technical maintenance on a frequent basis, a lot of upgrades going on, things that don't fit well with your current MarTech stack. So if you're really not switching out your whole, marketing automation or CRM solutions to match with the content management solution, and you're running into problems because things just aren't playing nicely together, all of that can really sap a lot of the capacity that you have as a team, and that creates a problem because you start to fall behind with what you need to be doing on the web. So that's something to really keep in mind, how it fits in your overall ecosystem, and what does that ongoing maintenance look like. So as Cole mentioned out of the start, we're conducting an industry survey right now, which you'll hear more about at the end of today's presentation. But last year, as we gathered information, one of the questions we asked is, what CMS does your main site use? So this is across healthcare organizations. And this is just the range of solutions that were kind of at the top of that list out there. And the four across the top, as I mentioned, are four that we work on at Geometric, and some of the most widely used solutions in the industry. And so I just want to talk a little bit about those different criteria for what makes a great fit and some of these solutions that are out there. So I think really looking across these solutions, you want to be looking at these different factors and evaluating what's going to be a good fit for you. So something, like I mentioned, WordPress that maybe gets dinged for security sometimes, has a really simple and efficient content authoring experience. And there's a lot of folks that are familiar with that and comfortable with that. And so there's trade-offs in each of these platforms. Something that has like maybe Drupal that has a lot of support for structured content. Sometimes the content authoring experience may not be as simple and efficient as you need it to be. So it's important to balance not only the capabilities of the platform in and of itself, but as you get into the actual implementation of this system, making sure that you're paying attention to those basic needs in how the site gets built out. So shifting to kind of that internal assessment and getting ready to think about what CMS might be a good fit, gathering some information there, really encourage people to create a site inventory. And as I work with organizations, and if they don't really have a good sense of even what websites are out there and what's going on with them, it can be really be a challenge as you dig into this process to know how things need to come together. So some of the things I would look for in a site inventory, just an overall, what are the domains, the marketing URLs that we have out there? Where do they live? What platforms are they on today? What does traffic look like on a monthly basis for each of these sites? How big are these sites in terms of content items, as well as different types of content that are defined in the system? How many contributors and what types of contributors do we have going on with these sites? What pieces of your MarTech stack are they tied into? And what other kinds of functionality needs do we have around each of these sites? So this is great information to gather as you're digging into that evaluation process, really understanding where you're at today, and that can help inform a good match. If you don't have a site with a huge amount of traffic, some solutions can really be overkill for what you're doing. If you have 2 content contributors versus 200, the kind of solution that you might be looking at would be quite a bit different. So definitely a good place to start and understanding the lay of the land inside your organization in terms of what's there today. All right, I wanted to touch briefly on some evolving technical architectures. So this is kind of where we get into headless and some of those terminologies. And what is really fueling that is we've got lots of different digital experiences we want to support now. So it's not just about a desktop website, but of course we've got all those responsive mobile variations. We've got mobile apps, we've got messaging through different platforms. And how do we maintain all of that content and at the same time be able to iterate on this and change things? Alongside of all of those pressures from kind of the device side is also the growing prevalence of cloud-based hosting and some of the approaches there that allows things to be built in a little bit different ways and scaled in different ways. So I'll run through this kind of quickly, but really what we're looking at here is shifting from a monolithic structure, as it's called. So this is where the front-end experience that visitors to your site have and the administrative experience all live within the same system on the same web server, just to kind of make it simple there. And so this is kind of the traditional way of doing things. As things have progressed over the last several years, there's been a shift towards decoupled architectures, and a lot of different CMSs can support this kind of approach, where you've got actually a CMS system running on both the administrative server and a front end, a production server that is what your site visitors experience, and the two talk to each other and can push things back and forth. And then the headless actually kind of separates that out further. So you've got a kind of an administrative system, and then you've got APIs on top of that that drive any number of different front-end experiences. And so there's pros and cons, as you would imagine, to each of these. So the monolithic approach is pretty simple. It's pretty familiar to people. It's a little bit easier to test and deploy. Everything kind of moves together, which creates some simplicity there. There's a lot of pre-existing solutions there. So that's a real benefit, is if you're trying to make use of things that already exist, then plugins, widgets, themes are really going to work well in that situation. From the decoupled standpoint, some of the reasoning for this is, you can imagine that the load on that front-end server is quite a bit different than the administrative server. And so you've got some different options for scaling each of those to respond to that different demand. And you may want to secure those things differently. You can also make changes at a different pace. So if you want to make changes to the front end without having to, manage changes to the back end at the same time, you can actually do that in this setup. So that's kind of some of the benefits that actually carry over to headless as well. And some of the additional benefits to headless is really thinking about multiple front ends. If you want different systems, like I said, mobile apps as well as websites to work off of the same data source, this is kind of what that approach is designed around. It also lends itself towards combining content from multiple different sources. So this is kind of the pure view of these architectures. What we see in healthcare a lot of times is really a combination, between that monolithic and headless. Sometimes those things get combined a little bit, where we're pulling content or information via APIs and mixing that in with things that are maybe pulled from a more traditional CMS. So while this is kind of the pure view, know that in reality, the final solution may be more of a hybrid model, combining some of the best of both worlds. The trick here, I think, as far as evaluating where you want to be at, is to focus first on the user experience. Make sure you know the user experience that you want to create, and that is really driving what you need to do rather than the technology. So sometimes talk to folks that are really excited about the idea of headless, or working a site through a particular technology, and haven't thought through what the experience needs to be. And so that's really where I would encourage you to start. Really understand what are those key transactions that you need to support on your site now and shortly down the road. Really understand how to support a healthcare consumer through that journey. What's it going to take? What can you achieve today with that? And where do you want to be down the road? And then finding that technical approach that is really the simplest thing that allows you options today and in the future in order to be able to iterate on that. So thinking about iterating really brings us to my final theme that I'm seeing out there. And this is a shift to a product mindset. And again, in talking with teams out there, I see really two distinct approaches. Some really focus on a website redesign, a relaunch, a selection of a new content management system as a project with a particular end goal, and that's kind of the overall thought process. Some really focus on more of a product mindset. So this is about the long-term business value that you're building through the product of your website, taking a really intense customer focus along the way, really having the user drive some of the decision-making and the priorities, and then continuing to use a data-driven, iterative process to continue to enhance what is going on with your site and with that digital experience. So this is a shift from that kind of launch it and forget it towards continually improving, a shift away from that internal focus. We're just going to make stakeholders happy, or we're going to meet the timeline we've committed to, versus what is right for the customer, what is going to drive customer value in the long term. And then that classic, this is output, how many things do we deliver versus outcome? What actual revenue did we produce with this change to the system? And so as we look at these two approaches, particularly for websites, what we are seeing is a little bit of a shift from kind of that classic approach, the big bang redesign, and then you go several years in there and do another one, and then do another one, and each one gets a little bit better. You kind of move up the ladder there as far as the impact, but it takes a long time to get there, versus having that ongoing continuous improvement where things are continuing to evolve in small chunks over time, and we're continually investing in that website. So this is something to really be thinking about and having a long-term plan for your organization. So think beyond launch. Really understand what, from a technical perspective, what are you responsible for? What do you have partners helping with you with in terms of updates to the platform, upgrades, maintenance, testing, all of those things that kind of suck time away from doing some of the really specific things that are unique to your website, unique to your digital solution. And I would encourage you to look for solutions that support that product mindset, things that help to support that customer-focused data, that don't create friction around doing iterative improvements. And at the same time, I think it's important to be realistic about your team's capabilities and capacity. Sometimes we definitely overcommit in terms of what we think we'll be able to do after launch, or what people will be able to take on. And again, sometimes if those maintenance tasks are taking over for really understanding the data or making decisions about a strategy, then that really creates a lag in the whole system there. So be realistic about the team's ability, both technical ability and just capacity overall to make those changes. So just a quick summation here. Some of the trends we talked about today: digital front door, really driving a lot of things inside of healthcare, creating some different demands on that system that connects the digital experience to the organization. We've got more focus across the board, across industries, on the authoring experience and the project management aspects even of content. Thinking about digital governance, really making sure that those foundations are in place, that we're making good decisions and not kind of delegating some of that responsibility to the technology. In the technology space, knowing that things are continuing to evolve and really being aware of that slow but continuous change that's happening there, thinking through some of those technical architectural approaches that are out there. So I wanted you to be kind of aware of that and hopefully get a little bit of a glimpse of what those look like. And I think the biggest takeaway is to really dig into that product mindset and think about what that means for your organization, how to shift towards that continuous improvement model. Some of the things, if you're taking this away and you want to go make some plans, understanding your business strategy is a great place to start. The more you can know about that, the better. Really deciding, what is that team identity? Who are we? What are we good at? What are we going to be great at as a team? And which things are we going to delegate to other places or not do? strengthening the governance is a great first step, and making sure things are really tight there before leaning on the technology to create that experience. Knowing what you have going on, focusing on the user experience, and then making sure you've got that long-term plan. So thinking beyond launch, really identifying what it is year 2, 3, 4 that you're going to possibly be wanting to do, how you're going to be wanting to operate with that platform. Really appreciate everybody's time and attention today. And if you do have follow-up questions, the information kind of comes out within the webinar follow-up. Feel free to reach out. Happy to jump on the phone and chat with you about your unique situation. A lot of this is so specific to a given organization, a given strategy, market, the place that you've been at. What does your team look like? Those kinds of things. So always happy to kind of talk with you about where you're at and bounce ideas around about possibilities. Love doing that. So feel free to reach out through any of those channels, and would love to chat with you.
Great. Well, thanks, David. We appreciate that offer. And thanks to all of our attendees today for joining us. And we will talk to you next month.